Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Good morning. For our final day of our LANO virtual conference, we have made it to day 3. Thank you all who are joining us again and have been with us for sessions this week. We're going to end today on a bang with a lot of really great presentations. Once again, comments, questions, thoughts, concerns in the chat would be great and helpful. We cannot do this. This week has been really made possible by the generosity of our sponsors, including our presenting sponsors, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Louisiana and Shell. And a special thanks to Shell Oil for making this affordable for all of you to attend for only $25 for all of this great content. When the conference ends, you'll be getting email from us about how you'll be able to update, probably beginning next week, access all of the great content from the conference, and we hope you'll continue to use it, watch the sessions you didn't get to see. But for now, I'm going to take it away. Those of you who don't know, I'm Jill Rajto, serving as Executive Director of LANO. I've got with me today also Associate Director Christian Beatty, without who this would not have been possible. And I'm going to jump right on in and introduce today's first speaker, who has been also, without her, this would not be possible. She has helped us put this on, and we are so grateful. Mary Ellen Slayter is the founder and CEO of RepCap, which is a content marketing firm she's going to talk about. Before that, she served as Director of Content Development at Smart Brief and a columnist and an editor at the Washington Post. She is a very accomplished woman. She has a master's in journalism from University of Maryland and a degree from Louisiana State University in agronomy. That's interesting, Mary Ellen. And it's been great to work with her, and we're thrilled to have her this morning. So take it away, Mary Ellen.
All right. Thank you so much for having me. So as Jill mentioned, my background is as a journalist, and then also now as the owner of a marketing agency. And, even more than that, I'm also very involved in my community. And I think part of what has motivated me to support the work of LANO, I first want to just give them thanks, because I have been serving on boards. As a business owner, I'm often asked to serve on these boards. And I don't think that I could have done it as competently or confidently as I have without the help and support of LANO, particularly the leader, the Emerging Leaders program that they've run. So, major props to Kay Irby for being the reason why I, haven't crashed my board assignments to date. And currently I'm serving as the president of the LSMSA Foundation, which supports the mission of Louisiana School for Math, Science, and the Arts in Natchitoches. So again, I just wanted to first I'll start off with how grateful I am for everything that LANO has done for me and for the boards that I have served on, especially UK. So, all right. So today we are going to talk about nonprofit comms, right? Because everything about our world in terms of how we communicate in business, in government and in nonprofits has just completely radically changed this year. So the first thing, is in the past, we really did rely on in-person events for a lot of our connection, right? You would go fly and meet your major donors, or you might host community events where people would come out and you'd have something simple like little coffee snacks, maybe a local vendor would provide it. And you had all these opportunities, to connect with the people that you served, as well as your donors and your other stakeholders, and you might have even relied on a major event as your primary fundraiser and driver of brand awareness. So 2020 took all of that away from us, right? So then what do we do in this kind of environment? So today what I want to talk about actually is what we can do, right? So we know that our plans, so much for plans, right? Everybody, I'm sure you were so good. If you made a strategic plan, you thought, okay, well, I'm good, I'm set, right? But then something came along, and so much for strategic planning. This is one of my favorite expressions, because it just reminds me that whatever plan we come up with, until you actually take it, into the world, it's still just a plan. And then we have to fight, and we have to fight for our customers. We have to fight for the people that we serve. We have to fight for our donors, every step of the way. And so I think this year has been a particularly good reminder of that. And so what I want to talk about is how we, instead of many of us, and I'll say now, because we had the benefit of 6 months of dealing with this, our instinct was to freeze, to just stop doing everything. And that's not necessarily the wrong thing to do in that exact moment. But I hope that by now you shifted from a strategy of freezing, and spiking things and just abandoning things to trying to adapt. So one of the things I want you to look at is like, I don't want you to throw away whatever campaigns you've been working on, right? So if like, you don't have to throw away everything that's ever worked, but I want you to go in and I do want you to find ways to adapt. And that starts with reviewing your assumptions. So let's say, before all this happened, we were actually having a pretty good economy, right? And we might have come up with appeals that were based on things like, sharing like our generosity and like all this stuff. That's going to sound really off when we have 20 to 30% unemployment in some cases in the communities where we went looking for donors, right? Like it's like our donors are in many cases in as much need as the people that we think we're serving. So I want to also say that confirm that people, I say buy here, but what I really mean is like, and I'm going to use an example from like outside of nonprofits to tell you, like car ads kept running saying, come buy a car, come buy a car. Like when we obviously couldn't buy cars, in March and April and May. So now we can buy cars again. But I want you to think, do you have something in your, in the way that you're communicating with people that essentially the equivalent of buying a car, right, at the beginning of the pandemic? So if thinking from a nonprofit standpoint, it's just like, what can you even use? What can people even use what you're offering? So the other thing I want you to do is go back and look at the language in your campaign. So for example, if you are using like taglines that may say things about being contagious, in the case of the pandemic, or living here where we live in Louisiana, maybe it's not the time to talk about the perfect storm, right? Like we had a pretty rough year on that front. And while that might be appropriate for people in other parts of the country, like I would really remove that because it can be incredibly triggering and not in a good way for people that you may be trying to communicate with. The other thing I want to talk about here is I think there was an instinct to try to jump in and connect what you're doing to the crisis at hand, right? To the pandemic. Or I think people in Louisiana know better than to do that with storms. But I think it's like you wanted to like put yourself, you knew that you couldn't talk about your other thing before, but how could you connect it to the storm? And like, that's a huge mistake. I would say if there is a natural connection, make it, right? But don't force it where there isn't one, because not every organization is positioned to add value in this crisis or any other particular crisis for that matter. And if it feels wrong to you, like if it feels like a bit too much of a reach, it probably is. And I would, if you're feeling that kind of, if your gut is telling you that it's off, go run it by a few stakeholders before you push that out into the broad messaging. The other thing I want to remind everybody of, and I think this is just being responsible, and I feel like most people know this, but it's worth saying, is don't, when you're in the middle of a healthcare crisis, if you're not a healthcare organization, don't give out healthcare advice in your communications. You could go partner up with someone who is a healthcare expert that has an adjacent mission, but like you should not be doing that. And I would also say you need to tell your team members this, because sometimes reporters will call, they won't come to you. They'll just be looking for someone to talk to about whatever crisis is going on, whether it's the pandemic or something else. But like set your people up to understand like the guide rails, right? Because press is good, yes, but like you don't want to put yourself in a position of getting press for saying something that could inadvertently harm people. So the next thing I want to talk about is how in our communications, like during a time like this, we want to make sure that we are adding value. So if we open our mouths, if we put something out, if we send out a newsletter, whether we're talking digital communications or old school, make sure that whatever you're putting out there in a crisis is accurate. You want to make sure that you are amplifying and sharing reliable information and not gossip. And this is where, even if what's going on isn't directly related to your mission, it's really easy to share things, but like I would say focus on sources, like amplifying things from reliable sources. So if you're not a healthcare organization, but you know that your, constituents, like your stakeholders would be interested in knowing this information, go and, amplify what the governor's office is saying, amplifying like what another, respected known institution is saying. That's a way for you to build those connections in the community, amplify good messages without putting yourself out there with too much risk. The next thing I would say is to focus your messaging on being helpful, right? So where you do have expertise, share it generously. And I'm going to give you an example of that, like just even from my own work, right? So I run a digital content marketing agency. Like digital was what we were before. We have a fully remote team. When the pandemic started, a lot of my competitors and also organizations that I serve had no idea like how to make this shift to digital. And I just made it a point, and everybody on my team did this too. Like we didn't like hoard that knowledge, right? Like we wanted everybody that we could work with, like, okay, we got this figured out, and we just shared it. We didn't see it as a competition, right? Even when they literally were our competitors, and we just helped people get through it because it's the right thing to do. And I would say to where you have that kind of expertise, where you have developed a means to solve a problem, just share it. Like, I mean, as members of LANO, I actually already I'm sure that y'all are already kind of in that mindset, but if you figured out best practices, pass them along, find out your stakeholders, find out your donors, what do they need that you can help them solve? It may not be obvious. So the last point I want to add here, and again, I think for most of you, this will come naturally, but it's good to have a reminder, is to be kind in your communications. As I think we all know, if you've been on Facebook for 15 minutes, it is incredibly easy to forget that there is another person on the other side of your digital communications, right? So you're posting on Facebook. You think, is there another person over there, right? You're sending out an email. There's a person whose inbox you just went into. And so think before you post, think before you hit send, think before you publish. Like, are you being kind? Because people are so stressed out right now. Is your content that you're putting out, is it a voice of calm, right? Or is there contempt exuding in it, any kind of scorn, whether you're directly talking about your mission or not, right? And how even you're behaving out in the community as leaders, like it really does set the tone for how we talk to each other. And it's so hard digitally, I think, sometimes to keep the right path there. Whereas we would never say these things to someone's face in person. You would never write a letter like that and send it to the newspaper, right? To be printed for everyone to see. You would never write a billboard. And yet, that is what you have done if you post it on Facebook. Be kind. So, and also if you guys, I'm going to be zipping through a lot of stuff and I'm about to start to get into a lot of like how-to sort of things. If you have specific questions, please post them in the Q&A. And when we get to the end of the presentation, we will work on answering as many of those as we can. So the next thing I want to talk about is the actual channels of digital. And I think sometimes I intentionally started with those general principles because I think sometimes people want to jump into the channels. So let's take those ideas about being accurate, being helpful, being kind, and apply that to the channels we want to work on. So the first thing I want to talk about is the cycle that we have to work in. In the past, like in a non-digital world, you could take 6 to 8 months to prepare for an event. We don't do that on the digital side, right? It's more like 6 to 8 weeks or 6 to 8 days or 6 to 8 hours. Like everything moves faster digitally. So go ahead and like get comfortable with a faster cycle for producing your communications. So if it used to take you a whole month to get out an email newsletter, like you've got to figure out how to do that every week. Right? Like this is not something you can take a month to do anymore. Like that is not enough communication for your stakeholders. It's not enough for your donors. It's not enough. You got to get stuff out there weekly. Weekly newsletters are really good. And a lot of times when I talk to people in nonprofits, they are horrified when I tell them that because they say, well, we have to write it and then we have to go get it reviewed and then it goes to the board and all this. And I'm like, that has to stop. That is not agile. That is not compatible with a strong digital strategy. Like you've got to empower people to move and make good decisions quickly. The second thing I want to add here is like, look at your budgets. And I know many of you are operating on even tighter budgets than ever before. But, whereas you might have had a certain amount of money dedicated for something for the year, that may not work in this environment. So you may find that you need to target your spends, like when you're running campaigns specifically, it's going to be intense, right? So, and your board might not like this, right? But you got to prepare them for this. But like, instead of saying, oh, we're going to spend $1,000 a month, amplifying this campaign on Facebook, instead it's going to be, hey, we're not going to spend anything for 3 months. And then I'm going to need $3,000 to run a 3-day campaign. Is that cool? So prepare your board for like that level of like up and down and that kind of spike and those sorts of intensity. The next thing I want to talk about, and I think this is, again, something that came natural to you probably, pre-digital and whenever we were able to meet each other in person. Your goal in your digital communications is not just to blast people with things. Like, and I know that it can feel really impersonal. You're like, oh, I sent an email, or oh, I posted on something. Your goal here is not to just build up this audience and like bombard them. It's to build and nurture a healthy community, but you're just using digital tools to do it, right? The idea is to take that very thing that you did in person and translate it to online, like to keep your brand, to keep your mission, keep everything. Like, think about what your mission is, and then think about how you can use digital to express that. So first thing I want to talk about is email, because I love email marketing. Okay. I love it for the way that it converts. I love it for how inexpensive it is. I love it for how forgiving it is. And there's a couple of rules for doing this really well. You will hear people say, oh, email doesn't work. It doesn't convert. Those people are doing email badly. They're doing it badly. So the first rules that I wanted to kind of talk about, there's two principles, right, that I always try to follow when it comes to content. One, opt-in is always better than opt-out. So your goal should be to provide the kind of content that people will actively choose for you to send to them. So if you've been buying lists, like that's not going to work. If you've just been adding people randomly to the things you're working on, that's not going to work. Like, you've got to come up with a way to create content that people choose to receive from you. The second thing is that quality is better than quantity, right? I would rather see you send out a really good email once a week than send out and just bombard people every other day with campaigns that, are of poor quality, of like content that's poor quality. So work on quality and balancing it effectively with your quantity. And that'll honestly solve your opt-in, opt-out problem. So talking about email. So one, that why do I say opt-in is better than opt-out? So for one, it's the law, right? So even before GDPR, if you're, communicating with people in Europe, we had the Can Spam Act here in the US. It gave us very clear rules about this. We don't send people emails that they didn't ask us to send them. Right. And if you do, that's called spam. And the FTC can technically fine you for it, for every single instance of it. It's like $16,000. I only have ever heard of a few people actually getting fined for it. But what is more likely to happen is that your email service provider, the company that you use to send your emails out, like Constant Contact or MailChimp, or even the service through Blackbaud, like eventually they will actually throttle you. You will get labeled a spammer and you will be unable to send anybody emails. So it's the law. And eventually, and if the FTC doesn't come at you for it, your email service provider will. The second reason why I say this is because your engagement will be so much stronger. The numbers that I like to look at to determine how effective an email campaign is the open rate and click rate. They are, and I will say on an open rate, on an opt-in rate, I expect 20% open and 8 to 10% click through. On an opt-out list, or a list, that's what we call it when we've just been adding people and seeing if they unsubscribe. It's more like 5%, like 1 to 5% as an open, and the click-through rate is like minuscule. Like, it just doesn't happen. So the last piece here too is just talking about protecting your brand, right? So as an organization, you have a brand that you want to uphold. Trust is everything when it comes to nonprofits, whether you're talking about your donors or other stakeholders. And if you send people stuff they didn't ask for, like, you are undermining that trust, and it will keep you from being able to send them the stuff you want them to see next time. So just please don't do it. All right. The next piece of this, so we talk about who we send to. This is where we're going to talk about what we send them. And the first thing I want you to think about is, like, why are you even making this? Like, sometimes we think of email, and content, it's just this thing that we push out and it's extra. But like, really, your communication assets and your channels are products, sort of offerings unto themselves. So the first thing I want you to do is articulate why someone should read this, not why you should send it, right? Because I think that's easy for us to say, well, I want to send an email because I want to tell our donors what we're up to. That's the wrong way to think about it. Like, step back and instead say, what do our donors want to know from us? What do they need? How could we help our donors? Or, if it's a trade association in other cases. So for my time at SmartBrief, I worked on a lot of emails for trade associations specifically, and they were often large professional organizations like the American Nurses Association. And what they want to know is not what your organization is doing, believe it or not. Like they do like a little bit of that, but what we found, say in my Smart Brief time, what the nurses really wanted from ANA was career advice and training opportunities. So that's what we sent the emails about, right? Like we rounded up news that affected their profession, and then we also found good career advice stories, and then we included links to like the training opportunities that they needed to maintain their certification. So this is that's going to their, that set of stakeholders on a trade association side. Similarly, go look and see what your donors wish. If you've got a more traditional organization, like say one supporting a school, like an educational initiative, what do your donors really need, right? If they care about education, do they just want to know what you're up to, or do they want to know what's happening at the legislature? Like, could you give them something that they can't get anywhere else? And you should be able to line this out. Like you should be able to articulate this, like if we're any other product. So or any other offering or any other program, your email is a program, basically, if you want to think about it that way. Who needs this? Why do they need it? And like, how are we going to get it done? So that's the biggest thing that you need to work out for every communication channel. Similarly on Facebook. And I'll tell you, like our instinct a lot of times is just to post like, hey, we raised money, we did these sort of things. Again, all about us. But one of the things that I heard, this was like probably 6 or 7 years ago at South by Southwest, there was this neuroscientist turned marketer in the room. And this was in the earlier days of social media marketing. And he said something that has stuck with me ever since. He had done research on what makes people go onto channels like Facebook in particular. And the number one answer, the number one answer? It wasn't to find out the news. It wasn't to see what my company was doing or what my nonprofit are up to. The number one reason people get on Facebook is to find out what other people are saying about them, right? They're tagging people. They're getting tagged and they're like, ooh. The number two reason that people went on Facebook was to find out what other people were saying about other people they knew. Right. So that's where, if you understand that psychology, again, this is true in real life. Like, how do you get awesome people to come to your in-person event? Well, you start by getting a few awesome people to agree to come and bring their friends. So you want to think about how you communicate with this, like what makes them want to share it? What would make them want to consume this information? And it's giving them something they want, and it's tagging them in it. So the next piece is like actively investing in growing these channels. I know that sometimes when we talk about nonprofit comms budgets, like it's very easy for us to request money and get approved for money to build tangible things. Like, oh, obviously I need $20,000 to design and print and distribute our annual report and these paper things. Like I find that it's still really easy for some reason to get money for paper, like for mailings. But if you say, hey, I'm actually just going to do this digitally, it's going to be a PDF, but I'd like that same amount of money we used to spend, and I want to spend it on running Facebook ads, I find it like, or even Google ads, right? Because Google will give you a little bit of free advertising too. But you say that for some reason, like people have this visceral reaction, but like I would encourage you to fight for that. Like that is actually exactly what you want to do. Move that money that got freed up because you're not doing these in-person things and invest it in the things that you need to do digitally. Because people aren't just going to stumble into your newsletter, and I told you can't add people without their permission. So how are you going to get in front of them? This is how you're going to get in front of them. All right. The last piece of this, and this is something where digital really gets its real power. So you're sort of working your way through these things. What I really want to see you get to the point of is segmenting and personalizing, right? Because again, with email and also with social media, it becomes incredibly easy to start to target your messaging. Whereas at one time you might have sent out one annual report, one update, you put out one newsletter because you couldn't imagine like doing that how many times, right? Instead, segment it out and say, okay, do my stakeholders have substantially different interests or angles on these topics, even for the same story? And then what I mean by personalization is more than just putting in that hi, insert name here. Like that's not really personalization. That might make you feel better, but like everybody knows that you use a token for that. Like that's not really that exciting. But you can tweak subject lines if you have the list segmented to highlight the part they're going to be most interested in. You can also tweak the actual order of the content. Most of the decent, like all these email providers that you have access to will let you tailor this information. And it's a little bit of I want you to do the other things in this list first, but my goal for you is that you get to this part where you're really using the power of digital. Okay. So the next thing, I told you that it was really important that you cared for your list and you didn't just drop people in, right? So let's talk a little bit about how we take care of our list. And I call this deliverability, but that's just a fancy word for saying, that's my marketing jargon for saying, like, how do we make sure that the emails that you send out actually make it into the inbox of the person that you wanted to get them? That doesn't just happen, and you actually have a lot of control over how good this is. So one, opt-in only. The second, I want you to watch what happens, like watch your engagement numbers. I think a lot of times when I know nonprofit comms people are very busy, but it's really easy to just like send out an email and then never come back and look at the results, much less go look at a trend pattern until somebody at the end of like the year suddenly goes, hey, I need a report. How are our comms doing? And you got to do it for the board and now you're sweating. What I would suggest that you do instead is make a little bit of time every week to take a look at how your emails are performing, or every month or every quarter, depending on your cadence. So the numbers I want you to look at are your bounces, which means, hey, I sent the email and it just came on right back. Hard bounce. So I'm using some of this terminology here if you're not familiar, but like hard bounce means I sent it and that email is not valid. Like it's either got like a typo that makes it not work, or their email account is down, or it's full. Soft bounces are temporary. That's usually some sort of issue with the server on their side. But either way, you do not want that number to go over 2%. If you're going over 2%, your email service company, your MailChimp, your Constant Contact is going to assume that you're probably sending to some bad list and they're just going to shut you down. So don't do that. The second piece is that if you are pulling in lists from somewhere else, such as your contacts, or you had an old opt-in list, before you put it in your email service provider or run it into your CRM, into your system like Blackbaud, run it through a service like Zero Bounce. Zero Bounce is my favorite. There's also another one called MailFloss. There's a bunch of these little services. Zero Bounce, again, by far my favorite. It costs pennies per email and it can literally save your account. Like they will scrub out every bad address. They will flag the spam traps for you. They'll clean it out. And then you can put that in your system with a good bit more confidence about how it's going to perform. So the next thing, speaking of these platforms, right? So there's a lot of good platforms. So there are ones for nonprofits, and that's fine. I know there's one that's attached to integrated with Blackbaud. Like it's got its pluses and minuses. Things like Constant Contact, they're fine for most of your purposes. MailChimp, Constant Contact, Campaign Monitor is my favorite. It might be overkill for some of you, but like as long as you pick the one you like that has the best interface, that you're the most comfortable with, that you feel like you can use, that's the one that you should use, basically. And pay for it. Like pay that little bit of money. Like there are some features in these systems that once you pay that little bit of money, it unlocks your ability to mine data and connect with your audience in a way it is totally worth like $20 a month. And if your board tries to tell you it's not, like have them call me, because they're just devaluing your time. That's what they're doing there. All right. So the next piece is like getting the timing of these emails right. I know at the beginning, I talked about the idea of weekly emails, and I'm sure some of you are about to have a heart attack. But just consider that at Smart Brief, we sent daily emails, daily. And like once you get used to the idea of sending an email to a trade association membership base every single day, like you just suddenly weekly doesn't seem so bad. But this will also, the more you send it and you start to get the right times, you figure out, hey, do they want to get an email from me on a Monday, Tuesday, is afternoon better, morning? Sometimes you'll find things that surprise you. I know that in my line of work, I mostly do B2B marketing, and everyone assumes that obviously you need to send it during the work week. Don't post it on the weekends. Don't send on the weekends. And it turned out I had one newsletter I moved from being during the week in the morning at the perfect time. Everybody said Tuesday at 10 a.m. was the perfect time to send a newsletter. And I said, no, let's send this one Sunday afternoon, because I think that's when this particular audience is going to read it. And it turns out that the open rate went up like 8 percentage points on an already pretty good open rate. So test your people, like find out what they're into. The other thing is ask for whitelisting. So if you notice you're getting a lot of soft bounces, you might actually already be filtered out by the spam filters. So when people sign up, Say, hey, put me on your whitelist.
On the paper.
All right. So I wanted to show y'all, this is just a little screen grab from an email, that I had sent. And I just want to show you because I want to tell you a little bit. This is inside Campaign Monitor, but all of your email service providers are going to have a similar setup. So take a look. You'll see unique opens. That's how many people opened it. How many bounced. This shows you how many didn't open. That's a sad number. I don't like to look at that number. You can see what percentage open. So this is a good open rate. You can see what percentage of people clicked, and you can see what percentage of people unsubscribed, and no one reported it as spam. But you can also see, which I think is kind of cool, the way that it goes, like it got sent out. This was over a 24-hour period. A few people opened it, and then there wasn't much going on. And then suddenly there was the big spike. And like, if you were to kind of look at that capture further out, you can start to say, hey, maybe I should move when I send this email. I mean, don't y'all agree? It's pretty obvious I should move when I send this email. And I did. All right. Another thing when we talk about the tone and the content in our digital communications, this is a quote that I also always keep in mind from my friend Mike Carden, who was the founder of a tech startup and came into an environment where everybody else had lots and lots of money, and there was no way that he could outspend them. There was no way that he could give better gifts or throw any kind of over the top event. And I think that even though he was running a tech startup, I think there's some good lessons in here that are applicable to my nonprofits, because you're often going, nonprofits have to be scrappy, right? You have to like figure out like what to do. And so the only thing that you really can do if you don't have more money is to just be like cooler, right? Or like, and Mike always says, if you have to choose between being professional and being memorable, pick memorable. I don't mean do embarrassing things, right? Don't do anything illegal or unethical, but like be yourself, like write like a human. And in this particular case, what Mike did is he was at a trade show where the booth started at $20,000, and then you spend another $20,000 to $30,000, like bringing in all your stuff, and people give away things. And by the time you're all in, it's $100K. Well, he didn't have that. So they got there and they discovered they were the only people who didn't have it. And they went and pulled this box out of like the loading dock and put it up on the wall and had everybody come by and write what they thought about performance reviews on it. So get scrappy. This cost him nothing, right? And I think that y'all, like I said, y'all are used to being scrappy. So subject lines, right? In an email, you're going to have to keep it snappy. You get 5 to 7 words. If you're writing big, long subject lines, like that's not going to work in your favor. The other thing is there's some subject line testing tools that are free. And so one of them I would like to call out specifically today for y'all is it's called a company called CoSchedule, which is a very expensive, wonderful enterprise level content marketing platform. But their subject line tester, as well as their headline analyzer, are 2 really good tools that can help you stay on track. So you take your idea for a subject line and it gives it a score, and it tells you like what to do to improve it. So give that a shot. The other part of it, then the same tools will nudge you to do this, is you want to evoke an emotion. Like, it's no jargon. Like, come up with you need your power words here, right? You need to create anxiety that by clicking on the email, like you can help people relieve it, or you have to delight them. Those are your 2 choices. That's what happens that's how you get people to open an email. The other thing is to keep it honest. The subject line should match the substance and the tone of what you're sending, because it's really off-putting and damaging to your brand for an email to say one thing and then you open it up and you find something else. So don't promise informative just to go in and make a pitch, make an ask, right? Don't make it look like an ask just to go in and have it be an advocacy piece. Like keep it all, aligned. It's better for your brand. All right. The next thing, I want to talk about pictures for a bit. And this is true of email and social. I want you to get comfortable with authenticity, especially in the way that you set up imagery. And I think one of my favorite things that has come out of this pandemic and all of us working at home and having to get comfortable with these digital tools is the degree to which we are all being ourselves a little bit more now. I mean, we've all seen these funny videos where like somebody's kid comes running by like during their BBC report and things like that. But it's, like we're getting to the point where it's okay, like that we're not all perfectly polished all the time. It's okay that we have little kids that swing by our very important, once in a lifetime interview with BBC to ask me, ask where the, where the chocolate milk is. Like, so instead of trying to fight that and pretend like we're not in that, like just own it. I actually think that authenticity matters a lot more than production value these days. The more real, you can be professional, you can be memorable. You don't have to be perfectly polished. And that, if anything, people are responding better to that. It feels authentic. It feels real. It doesn't feel fake. The other thing too, and some people really hate GIFs and some people hate GIFs, and they want to argue about how we're supposed to pronounce the word. But regardless of how you want to pronounce it, I would encourage you to experiment with them in your emails and on your social, because they can add some levity into an otherwise dry platform. This is what I mean by like sort of doing your own like little picture. So I do a weekly newsletter for a magazine that we publish, a brand magazine. And every week, one of my goals is to have at least one real picture in here. And so I was talking about Douglas Adams in the newsletter. And rather than having a picture that was just, something from the movie or something from the book, this is a picture of me sitting on my front porch here in Baton Rouge, reading Douglas Adams. And you can see that obviously this is casual. I didn't like dress for this shoot. I was like, oh, I got the book, pick it up. And that's one of my favorite Douglas Adams quotes. So your copy, digital copy, you got to keep it crisp. I know there's this idea that like, because it's on the internet, there's no reason to stop writing. It's like, there's no limits like with print, right? Where it'd say, oh, well, that's going to cost $2,000 more. But you need to keep it crisp, keep it rolling. Don't ramble. If you've got really good ideas, it's okay to go long, but like, just know that the longer your copy, whether it's an email or Facebook or social, it's going to hurt your click-through rate. Like, people can only handle so much. So keep it short. Again, back to evoking emotion, like put some love into those headlines, use your good words, like give me a feeling, help me picture something, right? And then the second part of it is I want you to pace the ask. Like, I know sometimes there are going to be campaigns that you send out and they are going to be a hard ask, but like that should not be what is in my face when I open your email newsletter. So give me some value. Give me some information. Help me have that feeling, like that feeling you want to give me, and then go for the close. Like, you'll find that even though you might have people saying like, oh, well, this isn't converting, or we want to put this up front because that's the important part, but that's the important part to you. It's not the important part to me as a reader. All right. So now I want to talk about virtual events, which gets a little meta because we are in the middle of one, right? So I think that one thing we've all learned, if you've been in this event this week, is how hard virtual events are compared to in-person ones, or at least they feel that way. Sometimes, though, I think we feel that way because we forgot how hard it is to organize the real life ones. So we have to deal with like these technical difficulties, and we're always trying to figure out our microphones and the sound and our internet, like all the infrastructure things. And we sort of forget that there was also problems with like, hey, where's my lunch? When it was in person. But this is work. I guess that's the first thing I want. If you have found this frustrating to try to adapt things to digital events, like, you are not alone. Everybody is trying to figure this out. They're trying to find the best ways to do it, both as an attendee, as an event planner. And so if you're thinking about how you're going to do this for your nonprofit, like, I just want you to know this is really hard. It's actually hard work, and it's different. It is not just moving something in person to your computer. The infrastructure is different. People's capacity to pay attention is different. And the value that they're looking to get out of the experience is different. So just make peace with that and give yourself some grace. So the first thing I would say is you want to choose the right platform. There are a lot of platforms. And I know we all jumped on Zoom at first because it was super easy to use, but it had some serious privacy issues, including, I don't know how many of y'all saw this here in EBR. One of our school board meetings got crashed with pornography. So they've rectified that a little bit, but I would just say, don't assume that Zoom's the right one. Like, I would poke around. So there's this one, Big Marker. Some people really love this one. I do. I know not everybody is as comfortable. Compare, look at Zoom, look at Owen24. There's another one. There's Go to Webinar. There's been Hopin is another one that's been really popular, especially with tech companies. It's great for networking. They all have their pluses and minuses. So I would say start by thinking about what kind of experience you want to give people, and then go out and shop for the right platform that has the features that you need. The second piece, and at the right price, because they can also get insanely expensive. So next thing I want to think about your agenda. You cannot just take what was an in-person conference and slide it over and say, this is now my agenda for my virtual conference. I would say that worked about as well as when my daughter's middle school decided that the best way to do virtual school was to take their daily schedule and make it online. So they figured out pretty quickly that neither the kids nor the teachers could manage that very well. And they've made some adaptations. But One, tighten up your sessions, build in more breaks. People they can't handle like looking at a screen for 8 hours a day. This is another slide, and I would say I'm not going to get into much detail here, but my friend Jenny Ingham, who used to work with me here at RepCap and continues to do content marketing work, and specifically with nonprofits, actually introduced me to this. She's a teacher. She's an English professor. And I actually really like this because it got me thinking about online events in a different way of like what kind of learning environment I wanted to create. So just check this out. Like, come back. We can't spend too much time on it right now, but I do want us to spend some. All right, features to look for. You need a virtual lobby, breakout rooms. Like, look at all these. If these things are important to you, make sure that you can access them. I want you to design for inclusion. That means to use big fonts. Recruit for diversity. In some ways, that gets easier because sometimes it was harder for our more like our minority and women speakers to make some of these things, and now you have a little less excuse. I want you to embrace authenticity. Don't worry about scripts so much. In this case, I don't know how many of y'all saw the National Cowboy Museum. This guy kind of crushed it with Twitter during the pandemic whenever he couldn't, take tours anymore. So, be like Tim the Cowboy here. All right, you're going to get on camera, focus on the basics. This is pretty simple stuff. Turn your camera horizontal, use your headphones, and you'll have good audio. That's 90% of what you need to do to communicate by video. As I dress the part, I've had this in there before that reporter decided to show up at the New Yorker meeting without wearing pants. So maybe we should do that. Got you a couple of tools I want you to try out. Adobe Spark. It's like Canva. You can make videos really easily. It's cheap. There's a free and a cheap version. Hotjar lets you see how people are using your website. There's a good free version that nonprofits can get. And then Basecamp is a tool I really like for project management. And they have a discount rate for nonprofits. And I realized I only left us with 4 minutes for questions, Jill, like even after blasting through that. So, but I am happy to start answering a few.
Okay. Oh. Thank you, Mary Ellen. That was fantastic. That's a lot of great information. And
sorry, a little fast. I also have some handouts. I'm going to put some files in there.
Obviously, we're going to need to do another session because all of that I think is so relevant to all of what we're trying to do. And I was just thinking as fast as I could, taking some notes and trying to. We have one question. David asks, "What's a whitelist?"
Oh, that's a very good question. So, the idea of a blacklist, right? So if you are spamming people, you will get put on what they call a blacklist. That's like the no-go list. Like they will set up to where if you send an email from your IP, you are automatically blocked. A whitelist is the opposite of that. That means that, hey, send me these persons. I definitely want them. And you can do that in any email program. Outlook. So I would say go Google whatever program you use and whitelist and you can add the people that you're sending. So you need to ask, you can also ask people to do that for you.
Mary Ellen, put you on the spot. So we know that most of our organizations small, very limited budget. Of all the things that you were talking about today from a communication standpoint, what's the first thing everybody should do? The first simple thing I need to
email. Email is your low-hanging fruit. Okay. Like it is the thing that represents your community. So that, and you don't have to worry about Facebook algorithms. You don't have to worry about anything like that. If you invested in nothing else but email, like go there, go see who's in your list, clean it up, work on like a little research of like, well, what should I be emailing? Like, how can I make this email awesome?
Perfect.
Like if that's all you did, like pick a good email program and like start sending good emails. Look at that data.
Wonderful. Mary Ellen, thank you so much. This was fantastic. Everyone that joined us, thank you so much for joining us. We've got a 15-minute break. Like I said, we've got a great program today. So up next is going to be David L. Thompson. David is with the National Nonprofit Council. He's going to talk about all of the things going on in Washington having to do with nonprofits, public policy. It's really going to be interesting. And I'll tell you, that's something I've been trying to learn a lot about. It's somewhere we're going to try to delve a little more deeply into in the future of LANO to try to get you better information about what's going on in the government and how it affects our nonprofits. But David is going to be great. After that, we've got a mini session. Ethan Bush is going to talk about the 225 Gives Day, which is focused on Baton Rouge and the surrounding parishes. But if you're in another area of the state, it might be worth your while. It's going to be a big event to hear what Ethan has to say, because it might be something you want to model. I know a lot of areas have those giving days, but might be some new ideas to boost that up. And Maxine Crump, those of you who know Maxine, she is fantastic. So we're going to go to Maxine next, then about dialogue on race and how to create more diversity in your organizations. And we're going to wrap up with a final post game with Joan Cronin. So we've got a great day today. See you back at 10 o'clock with David Thompson in public policy. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Mary Ellen.